All right, good evening, everybody. Can I have your attention? I want to thank all of you for coming out. My name is Mike Hausman. I'm with the City of Delafield Lake Welfare Committee, and this is the annual Lake Awareness Meeting. First off, thanks to the Negawicka Lake Yacht Club for hosting us. I'd also like to point out we have a few members of Lake Welfare here at the meeting. I see Jerry Dunnick, Gail Gaborski. Please stand, you guys. Where's Don is back there. Just folks who put in a lot of time on lake welfare to the benefit of the folks who are interested in the lake. So Lake Welfare is a sponsored committee by the city, and we're responsible for taking care of a number of things having to do with the lake. We meet every month, so there's a lot of information to be gathered on the website. You can come to the meetings. Any of the meetings, all of the meetings have citizens' comments. If you wish to say something, you can say it. It goes on the record. So it's a formal committee, again, that's run by the city. We're here to help. So one of the things we do is this meeting. So the idea is trying to provide information to all the folks within the city of Delafield to what is arguably the most valuable resource for the city, that is the lake. So tonight we're going to be talking about safety, shoreline management, the fishery, and a few other things. I guess I don't have any other introductions other than, so our first speaker, might as well get into it. He's a senior ecologist with Eco Resource Consulting. He's got over 20 years as an ecologist at the federal, state, nonprofit, private sector levels. I'd like to introduce to you Clay Fraser.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Can you hear me okay? I usually wouldn't need a mic, but I know this is being recorded, so we're going to go ahead and use it. Okay, so I work as actually a restoration ecologist. Our company is called Eco Resource Consulting. We're based out of the Madison, Wisconsin area. We've got an office in Butler. But relatively small company, 14, 15 of us, and everyone is in natural resources in some capacity, whether it's soil science or water resources, ecology. My personal background is wildlife ecology and botany. Our company does a fair amount of lake water quality monitoring, aquatic vegetation survey sampling, and then we also plan, permit, implement, and monitor and maintain quite a few shoreline restoration projects, pretty much all through the upper Midwest. It's been a good business in the last 10, 15 years here, so, but we're going to jump into it here. So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about shoreline erosional forces. This is going to be probably pretty intuitive to most of you. Just a quick show of hands, how many folks actually live on the lake? So, oh, definitely more than half. And the rest of you, I would assume, are in the watershed, the Delafield area, the Lake Negawicka watershed. So shoreline erosional forces, obviously we talk about the physics of wave energy. We talk about what we call overland stormwater flow. That is, all that stormwater that does not infiltrate into the surface of the soil when it rains, it goes somewhere, either ponds on the surface, but if there's topography, such as in a watershed of a lake, it's going to move overland and create sometimes erosional scour forces. So we're concerned about that one. And then, of course, we're thinking about ice heaving a little bit. Sometimes that's more of an issue in northern lakes, so I'm going to breeze through that one a little bit. Just to touch really quickly on the permit process, the DNR has on their website what's called an erosion energy and erosion intensity calculations worksheet. It gets a little bit techie to think about it. I'm going to show you what some of those formulas look like. We're not going to go through it in depth, but just to give you kind of a context of what goes into it. So factors influencing wave energy on shorelines, you guys have probably heard the term fetch. It's just simply a calculation of how far is that shoreline away from the opposite shoreline on the lake. Water depth is an issue as well as wind speed. That is that energy calculation, and again, it looks like Greek to me too. We've got guys in our company that punch these numbers in, and of course there's a lot of modeling that go into that as well. But the point is that all of these factors come into play significantly when we are planning shoreline projects and trying to re-armor shorelines that have erosional conditions. So just to put that one up as a dashboard, that slide indicates basically all the things that affect EI or erosion intensity on shorelines. And you can see the ones that I have highlighted there and underlined. Those are the few that we can control, really, as riparian owners. Everything else, boat wakes, I was talking to a gentleman named Randy earlier. A little bit about boat wakes. Obviously, that's an issue right now. We're going to get into it just a little bit more, but it's debatable how much we can and cannot control boat wakes as riparian landowners, right? Everything else, though, aquatic vegetation, and bank stability, those are things that are generally within our realm of control. So one of the big challenges that we have in managing bodies of water is the fact that folks want to see the water inherently, right? It's kind of human nature. People like manicured low turf lawns, but there are some challenges with that. Stormwater flow rates do not decrease when they go over turf grass. They're not slowed down enough, and they don't infiltrate the way they need to. That means percolating into the ground and making it into the aquifer, other than being, forced over the top of the surface, the soil into the water. Erosional scour increases with mowing, and generally speaking, I'm going to show you a diagram that indicates kind of a comparative differential between turf grass root systems and native aquatic plant and native plant root systems in general. One of the big issues that we have is Canada geese. How many of you have battled Canada geese in your lifetimes at some point in time, right? Whether it's on the golf course or in your backyards at the lake. What we know as scientists is that Canada geese are absolutely attracted to low mowed vegetation. It doesn't have to be turf, but up against water. A large, small body of water doesn't make much difference. We know that Canada geese absolutely love turf grass mowed to the water's edge. It attracts them. And of course, there are some biological and even human health implications of goose droppings. So turf grass doesn't result in good ecological value. We know we have to maintain it, and there's a lot of fertilizers, sometimes herbicides and pesticides that go into it. Okay, that gets us through a few of the slides that have, my slides are auto-advancing again. I thought I fixed this. Sorry. So this shows a typical shoreline that has turf grass along it, and you can see some of the erosional conditions that happen there. Combinations, again, between that erosional scour happening from overland flow as well as wave energy pounding that shoreline, okay? Just not a well-armored shoreline. What we're trying to move towards is more of a solution, here we go again, where we've got kind of a combination of what we call hard and soft armor. The soft armor being the biological solutions there with native plants, and the hard armor being the riprap shoreline. Okay, so just to get into that, I think everybody's pretty familiar with this concept of seawalls and riprap being hard armor. Unfortunately, the challenge they have is they're just static. They're not dynamic enough to change over time, and so they're kind of static systems. They, unlike native plants, they cannot grow and change and move with changing lake levels and lake structure. Hard armor often gets undermined by water moving behind it or under it, particularly when it's not well installed. We see that happen a lot, unfortunately. Okay, and of course, there's very little wildlife habitat and water quality enhancement with hard armor. So we know that hard armor is necessary. We know that a lot of the lakes that we live on were developed a long time ago. They have seawalls, they have a riprap on them, and so, what we're certainly not advocating the idea of removing every seawall and riprap shoreline from bodies of water. We're trying to create a little bit more of a balance out there. So seawalls, unfortunately, though, even in lakes that have really good solid rock bottom sediment and substructure like Nagawicca here, the bottom sediments do tend to scour because of that erosional force of physics pounding the seawall and then curling it back over into suspension, taking that sediment, I should say, out of the bottom and creating it into suspension and having that move around. It's a big issue. You're going to typically see older riprap with a lot more sedimentation in it because of this. And generally, it's not because of the erosional scour that you're experiencing on your seawall or riprap. It's probably your neighbors, unfortunately. Okay. Very little what we call heterogeneity of habitat, very low complexity for fish and wildlife, and it often creates a barrier for animal movement, particularly herpetofaunal species, amphibians and reptiles in the water, right? So the next slide here is going to indicate that illustration, a little bit of what I was talking about here, where you have the wave hitting a seawall, bouncing that energy off to the bottom sediment, scouring that up, and bringing that sediment into suspension. And of course, from a water quality standpoint, that's problematic also because we know we've got a lot of what we call legacy nutrients in that sediment at the bottom of it, so it brings it up into suspension, and that phosphorus and nitrates sometimes in the water starts to drive water quality issues, particularly with algae blooms. Okay, so this is again just kind of a photo indicating a neighbor with a seawall and another neighbor that's got a little bit more of a solution where waves can actually move up over the rocks, energy can dissipate, and then those native wetland plants can help bioremediate that water by removing minerals, removing sediment and nutrients from that water, and then also helping the water percolate down into the aquifer rather than flowing directly back into the lake. Okay, so in my industry, a lot of us use buzzwords like ecosystem management or ecosystem services. We know that natural shorelines do stabilize sediment and they reduce turbidity in the water. We know that they absorb that wave energy that we're interested in. We know that they mitigate shoreline erosion and they oxygenate the water. That's what plants do for us, whether it be aquatic or terrestrial plants. They pull carbon dioxide out of the air or water and they oxygenate the air or water. Okay? And of course, they offer flood protection and they help break down nutrients and create pollinator habitat, which is incredibly important these days. Okay, just another little illustration there and before we move into one of my favorite slides here, and I hope, nope, I'm gonna have to go back to it. Hopefully it'll stick. Up on the upper left-hand corner in the far end there, that's turf grass root systems. That's about 6 inches. And by contrast, you start to understand why structurally it's important for us to think about incorporating native vegetation into our shorelines. And even, this is kind of an illustration of prairie vegetation, but native wetland and native aquatic species that grow on shorelines have very comparable root systems to these plants. And, it's inherent that in our business we use native vegetation not just to create habitat for the bugs and bunnies, but to armor soil and stabilize slopes. So it's got a very utilitarian purpose for us. Okay. Just a quick cross-section, typical wetland cross-section indicating all these different what we call ecotones, where various different habitat types tend to blend and morph together. With a good, well-diverse, well-planned system, you have plants that grow in the water, out of the water, on the shoreline, and then all the way up the bank edge into more riparian or woodland, forested wetland type habitat. So this is a healthy system. Consequently, this was what was here before we began to alter the system a couple of hundred years ago or less. Okay, so things to think about from an ecological standpoint when you're thinking about native plant selections. How deep is the water that you're planting in? What are the substrate conditions like, right? Is it silt? Is it sand? Is it rock, gravel? You need to make sure that you're choosing plants that are appropriate for those conditions. Light conditions are important, and wave action is a big deal, right? So again, I was talking to a gentleman earlier before this evening, and I think it's not a secret that the wake boats, the power boats, they're not going away. They're probably going to increase in frequency right now. But what's interesting about these types of boats is they create an incredible wake that travels a long distance, right? And of course, they magnify over time. They come together. Wave propagation is incredible physics. I'm certainly not a physicist, but it doesn't take a physicist to understand what wave propagation does on a body of water like this. Y'all have seen it get chopped up real bad on a holiday weekend, right? And you can only imagine what that's doing to soil substrates in the water, churning up those nutrients, driving algae blooms, and pounding those shorelines into submission, right? So plant community dynamics is important. That really just means what types of plants can play well together. That's important. Planting zones. I'm not going to get into CFC. That's a little bit nerdy botany stuff. But how do they look? That's a really critical element when you're dealing with folks that live on lakes. People are here because of the water. They want to see the water. They don't want their view sheds impeded, and they don't necessarily want these messy scapes and messy landscapes that can result from planting kind of willy-nilly native vegetation. Stature just means the height of the plants and how much maintenance might be involved. So a couple slides here on some of my favorite aquatic plants. This is burrweed. It looks like cattail, and ironically, it fills a very similar, if not identical, niche as narrowleaf or hybrid cattail, which is a huge problem, particularly on this lake further north, where we have some really sensitive habitat areas and you have a little bit more shallower water. The narrowleaf cattail is as a monoculture. It's one single species, has very low value for wildlife, but unfortunately it's also very shallow rooted as a tuberous plant, and it does not stabilize sediment and soils very well. So this is one that we use quite often, and this is kind of a foundational plant. It's kind of a keystone species in the sense that it supports the growth and development of a whole lot of other native wetland plants when we use it foundationally, okay? Don't know what I did there. Okay, so Sagittaria latifolia, good old arrowhead or broadleaf arrowhead. A lot of you folks have seen this one too. This is a broadleaf plant that grows out of water. We use it on shoreline restorations. And then Ponetaria cordata, pickerel weed. This is one that if anybody's been up north fishing or you got a cabin up north, you've seen this plant. It used to grow in this area. It really is a bioindicator of really high quality water, okay? So it's one that we tend to actually bring in several years after we begin a shoreline restoration, and we get these plants online. We get the water quality tuned up the way we want it. We can bring in more conservative wetland plants like this. Sconoplectus, that's the bulrush genus. And again, these are plants that are very robust, hard armor plants that do very well in shoreline restorations. Blue flag iris, that's a kind of a prettier one. We throw that in. It's clonal, and it does very well growing up out of mucky mineral type soils that are saturated in condition. Okay, so next few slides just kind of walk you through a typical shoreline restoration project kind of from start to finish. And again, we're oftentimes starting from this mowed turf situation up against the shoreline that has resulted in a lot of bank instability. We'll typically grade out the shoreline with heavy equipment like this, and then we go back and start planting aquatic plugs on shoreline zones that we've established, okay? The product that you see in the background there, and there's going to be a couple more subsequent images. This is called koi log. It's basically a coconut log that we put in the water. It's held in a position with stakes and twine. But essentially what it does is it creates a couple of different planting zones, one up in front of the log. On the top of the log, we put plugs, and then behind the log, kind of in this interstitial zone between the shoreline and the koi log, creates a whole other microclimate for plants to grow into. So, and that log, of course, is there for 3 or 4 years. It dissipates, it breaks down when the plant root systems grow into it. This is an interesting product that we've been used. We helped develop this product. It's called native vegetated mat, and it actually works just like sod, turf sod, except it's native vegetation. It's grown in a greenhouse in a specific planting medium. It's rolled up, and we bring it on job sites like this. We use it actually quite a bit as these buffer zone plantings along shorelines where we need more rapid vegetative cover. And there's that koi log starting, that's about a year in or less than a year in. You see some of those plants we talked about earlier, the pickerel weed, the arrowhead, the bulrush, and the burr reed. And this is that area of NVM, good grief. There we go. There's that area of NVM just a few weeks after installation. It gets watered in like sod, and it's kind of instant native plantings. Okay, and this is just simply a photo of shoreline restoration that is using Envirolock bags. Oftentimes we've got really steep slopes. This is particularly true on wooded shorelines where we've got a lot of root systems, very steep slope. We really can't grade that back, so we need to armor that wall in some way. Maybe we terrace it a little bit, which you can kind of see happening right in here. And then ultimately we can come in with that NVM type product, and we can put that product down. So, sorry about that. Let's see if we can go back to the beginning. Okay, so I condensed this talk intentionally. This was about 70 slides, and it was originally like a 30 or 40 minute, or I remember like a 40 or 50 minute talk. I must have spoken faster than I thought. I've got a little extra time. It's 20 after. And what I would love to do is spend my remaining time hearing from you guys, hearing feedback, either experiences you've had with shoreline restorations, challenges you may have currently with your shorelines or your water quality along your lakes. and maybe just some general comment and feedback on thoughts about maybe changes you've seen in your time here. What's interesting about Nagawicca to me is this is an old lake in terms of development. It was developed a long time ago. This yacht club was from the early 1900s. My guess is there were cottages here around that time, and there's still a good amount of naturalized shoreline here, which is rare, obviously, for this county, but the shorelines are here, are generally well protected, and the lake quality is generally pretty high. You've got a great fisheries resource here, as most of you probably know, but it's a delicate balance, and what we're trying to think about doing is just moving the needle bit by bit on what we can do to enhance or at least sustain water quality. So let me pause there. I'd love to hear from some feedback, some questions, comments, anything at all that I can, unless there's tomatoes to throw. Anybody? Yes, sir.
I don't know if this is within your discipline, but, you know, for this lake, for this county, for the state of Wisconsin, are there any studies or anything regarding the effect of road salt from de-icing on the quality or the ecology of the lake or lakes?
Yeah, so the question was regarding road salt and how it might impact lake water quality, essentially. Is that kind of encapsulated? So the answer is yes. There's been a lot of studies, both from university levels, agencies, DNR and Sewer PAC have been involved with those types of studies, maybe not specific to this body of water. How many people have heard of Sewer PAC before? Okay, that's great, more than half. And of course, I'm not an employee of Sewer PAC, but I can tell you they do some pretty amazing studies. They take their time doing it. It's not the most expeditious process, but generally speaking, they do really good science. Sometimes they employ consultants like me to help them with some aspects of data collection and data collation, but ultimately they do a pretty good job. And if you go on their website, you can find studies where they've studied the aquatic plants, they've studied the water quality of these lakes. What I can tell you just anecdotally about road salt is that yes, it has a deleterious effect on water quality, primarily from the stance that it changes pH, it changes water chemistry, and it actually alters the way that fish can absorb dissolved oxygen. So it does have a cumulative effect. There's a lot of studies about, more so about riverine and stream type systems because they're flashier. And what tends to happen is that when you get a rain event, the salt washes off the roadside, moves into creeks, streams, rivers, which ultimately make it to a lake, right? So most of those studies have been a little bit further up the watershed. You're at the bottom of the watershed at a lake, right? And so ultimately, the big issue is salinity changes the types of plants that can grow. And I actually recently read a study. Who's familiar with the plant Phragmites australis? Anybody know that one? Giant reed grass is the common name. The stuff that gets like 12 feet tall, great big feathery seed head. If you drive up to Green Bay or you drive along the lake corridor between Kenosha and Racine counties, you'll see it everywhere. And the studies that I read indicate that it loves saline soil conditions. And unfortunately, it displaces native wetland vegetation. So like most invasive plants, whether they're aquatic or terrestrial, they love depleted soil conditions. They love poor pH, low organic matter, low nutrient levels. And that's the type of thing that salt does. It changes the pH, it changes soil chemistry, it changes the way plants can uptake nutrients, it changes the way fish can take in oxygen. So it can drive, to a certain degree, aquatic invasive species on a cumulative effect level. Hopefully that begins to answer your question. So the answer is yes, I think. Anything else? No? Yes, sir.
I heard you say that storing up the nutrients not a good thing. In my area, we have a lot of nutrients. We call it mock. Is there best left where it is, or is there some way to get to digest that?
So when you refer to muck, it's actually a soil classification, okay? And really what it means is it's highly organic soil. It's essentially soil that's had a lot of plant root material in it, under saturated soil conditions, okay? It's generally not real rich. If you've ever taken muck soil and tried to put it in your lawn and grow soil or grow turf grass, it doesn't work so well, right? It's actually anaerobic. It means it doesn't have a very high oxygen content to it, but it's a very important component of wetland soils and wetlands in general. It's an indicator. It actually does support a number of macrophytic or wetland type species, right? But your question was more attuned into nutrient content with muck soils and how you get a churning effect in lakes. True muck, or even sometimes true muck peat soils, don't have that problem. What we have out here, like most lakes, is not organic soil being an issue. It's mineral soil. And what mineral soil means is it's literally coming off of agricultural fields, it's coming off of backyards, it's coming off of developed areas. It's basically loam, is a mineral soil. And when it finds its way into wetland position, it creates all kinds of ecological issues, not the least of which is driving algae blooms and aquatic invasive plant material growth. So ultimately, mineral soil is the opposite structurally of muck or organic soil. And the mineral soil is what's a much larger issue. Muck soil is generally pretty stable. It may look black and oozy and smell bad when you step in it, right? But that's actually just a lot of organic material and carbon dioxide being released really rapidly out of it. So it's a sink. It stores that CO2. And if it's not there, it's going to be in the atmosphere, which we all know drives all kinds of other issues, which I won't even get into right now. Does that answer your question? Look, sure, thank you. Yep, I mean, soil is a great, it's a great thing to understand as a riparian owner, the differences in structure between substrate soils, mineral soils that really aren't supposed to be there. I showed you some photos of those plants like burrweed that generally supplant invasive or hybrid cattail. Invasive hybrid cattail, reed canary grass, phragmites, purple loosestrife, you name it, they love mineral soil, high in nutrients, because a lot of those phosphates are bound to those tiny particles that find their way into wetland position through erosional processes. Okay, some of those are natural, some of those are man-made, right? And we exacerbate those. So the mineral soil moves its way in and drives all kinds of negative feedback loop in that system. Great question, though. Yep. Anybody else? Nope. All right, easy crowd. You guys, I mean, it's 6:25, so I'm a little ahead of myself, surprisingly. I did get here early. So, I mean, just again, a quick show of hands for my own satisfaction. How many of y'all have tried or have thought about trying native shoreline restoration projects on your land? And what kind of successes have you had or relative failures? Are they working? Are you happy with them? Are they maintenance nightmares?
It's not appropriate for where I am on the lake.
Okay. Just based on shoreline morphology and shoreline structure? You got a steep bank.
Steep bank,
Yep.
hard bottom,
Yep.
up on my bottom.
Yeah. Interestingly, we're doing some project work right now in Oconomowoc Lake, which has got some real steep topography on the east shore. And luckily there's a toe, what we call a toe, so it's flat bottom. Below the wall does not, these steep slopes don't go to the water's edge. There's a toe path, and then it goes into really heavy rock, right? So you don't have that massive shoreline armor problem, but what you do end up having on Oconomowoc Lake and a lot of Waukesha County lakes is a lot of woody invasive plant species like buckthorn that are on the shorelines. And if you look closely at buckthorn, what you'll notice is that there's just very little what we call herb layer. No herbaceous material can grow under it. And whether I'm talking about turf grass or some of this more deep-rooted native vegetation, for a lot of reasons, it actually eliminates those species. So if you end up with bare soil, which you may or may not have, now you've got a whole bigger problem of every time it rains, you're picking up that mineral soil and flushing it into the lake. So those are some of the things we try to mitigate in restoration. Anybody else in the back? You had a shoreline project that you tried?
I've been working on a shoreline restoration project ever since I moved back out here in 1999. And quite frankly, it's been a success. The frustration I've got is both of my neighbors have decided they don't want one bit of road aquatic vegetation in the channel. And
So,
It's something for you to think about.
yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that. I mean, so ultimately, I'm a boater too. I should preface that. I don't like to pull weeds off my boat, my prop, or my trailer any more than the next person does. Although I do like to speciate those plants sometimes and see what's in there. It's kind of a neat indication of lake water quality. But ultimately, boaters generally don't like weeds, quote unquote weeds, right? Fishermen, they begin to understand the ecological connection to having the right aquatic plants in a lake and fisheries quality, right? But it is a tough sell. There's no doubt. It's a different idea because oftentimes, again, as I mentioned and alluded to earlier, most of us didn't grow up on this body of water. We came here from somewhere else, and someone had already altered the system when we got here, right? And it's hard to think back. We kind of have this ecological amnesia about what these lakes looked like 150, 175 years ago. They were full of native aquatic, native emergent shoreline vegetation, right? That's why you have the resource that you do here. Is it going to be here in another 150 years? You know, that's a big question mark. So what I think about is the legacy concept of we are owning this land for a certain period of time. Yep, we're paying through the nose for it. We live in Waukesha County. We live in the state of Wisconsin. We're paying a heck of a lot to live here, right? Let's face it. And we want to have our way with a resource. But if you step back and think about it or try to, it's really about education. The fact that you folks are here right now, making the effort to be here, to be in community and learn something new, hopefully, that's step one. And to me, I think that gives me hope that people are out there doing it, talking to their neighbors about these things, one person at a time, hearts and minds, right? That's the best that you can hope for. So, anybody else? Other than that, yes, sir.
I naturalized my shoreline many, many years ago, and I moved the cord logs. Planted a variety of species, and some of them just, it's a maintenance nightmare that I don't feel capable of handling. You know, I put things like ironweed in there and sienna, and we got plants that are 8 foot tall. So, and the cattails are a problem. I live up in the channels. And the DNR has a lot of help on trying to eradicate cattails. They think that's an erosion control measure around our islands. My suggestion would be stick with carrots and sedges, and maybe do a mono culture rather than trying to get too fancy with blooming flowers. Keep the size down. And you had mentioned wave energy calculation by the DNR. I was kind of recently told that they gave that up, and we've had an example of a couple neighbors putting riprap in the channels with no wave energy. So, and they get a permit from the DNR. I don't know.
Yeah, no, so you're delving into a world that I deal with all the time now. So, yeah. I mean, so,
That was under that calculation
yep,
all
so
the
here,
time.
yep, and you're right. So here's the answer to it. Like most things with agencies, there is no linear track, okay? Those wave energy calculations, quite honestly, are antiquated. We can do better with more modern modeling. And the answer to your question is whether they're required for permitting always comes down to who that human being is who's going to issue that permit, okay? I deal with plenty of DNR folks that swear by it, some that could take it or leave it, and some have thrown it out the window. And you'd be surprised. So there is no like gold standard for every single person inside DNR. Some of them like it, some of them don't. Some of them will use it as a starting place, and it actually is not a bad starting place. It gives you a baseline of where you might be, and then you kind of can move around from there by changing some inputs, right? But the reality is that with shoreline permitting, you've got Waukesha County, you've got DNR. Quite honestly, it's a challenge.
We don't have Waukesha County, we have the DNR.
Well, on this lake, sure. Yep, absolutely. But generally speaking, you're living in a part of the world where you have kind of the duality of regulatory issues with water and wetlands and permitting, right? And sometimes you are dealing with Waukesha County, depending on the size of your project and where it is. But ultimately, again, it comes down to touch on the plant selection part. What you learned, the valuable lesson was understand the plants you're putting in the water, right? And this is what we do as ecologists. I've been doing this for 24 years. I can tell you that there's right plants and wrong plants. Ironweed is not a shoreline plant. It's 7 feet tall, right? It's not something you want to put between you and your lake, right? The sedges you talked about, they're 14 inches tall or less. So it's all about understanding your plants, and if you don't, you probably ought to hire somebody who does to at least help you develop a plant list. Then you go crazy. Go buy your plants, go plant them, do what you want to do. But there are thousands of plants out there, and there's a lot of ways to go wrong. You can buy them. Nurseries will sell them to you, right? That's what they do. But right plants in the right place, that's really a key element, right? So, all right, anything else? Because I'm a little over my time. Anybody? I think that's good. Oh, yes, sir, one last thing.
When we bought our property, we did it was riprap, we repaired the riprap shoreline, so there was turf grass up to that. And DNR required that we do shoreline plantings from the list of approved plantings, which we did. Some of those did not survive. The ones that did are beautiful and absolutely no maintenance. Easy and portable. Excellent property maintained, so it worked out very well, although some of them didn't survive. Sure.
I'll say this as an ex-DNR biologist, okay? DNR is a great agency. They've got some fabulous people working for them. But like any agency, they are steeped in tradition and history and process. And the plant list that you got, you're lucky. Maybe most of them made it, right? The challenge we have is that they don't update those things. Some of the spec that goes out on the DNR websites might be 15 or 20 years old. So maybe 15, 20% of it's going to work. Maybe 75% of it's going to work. Again, there's a lot of people that work inside DNR. Very few of them are botanists. Let me just put it that way.
The ones that survived are great. Absolutely. And no trouble at all.
Yep. Great. Good success story. Glad to hear it. So, okay, I think that's my time and then some, so I will wrap up. So thank you for your attention.
So first off, while Clay is packing up here, if anybody wants to come up forward, because we can pull this in. Mike, can I just set the cart closer to it? Or you want to give me a hand, Gordon? So there's a bunch of seats up here, but you'll have to be at the front of the class. So I know it's not the best place to be. If you'd rather be back there, that's fine. But there are a number of seats that are available, and there's a little bit of room up here if you want. Before we bring up Lieutenant Nyron, Susan Buchanan, are you back there? There you are. Okay, so our next speaker will only be for a couple minutes, but she's the first executive director of the Tall Pines Conservancy. Tall Pines Conservancy is the caretaker of over 1,500 acres in the Lake Country area. So they are a great steward of the things that we hold dear. So please, again, welcome Susan Buchanan.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for giving me some time here. I'm going to introduce you to two great organizations that are right in your backyard. As you mentioned, I'm the executive director of Tall Pines Conservancy. How many of you have heard of us? That makes me feel really good to know that we're getting the message out there. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit land trust, and we are working to preserve our rural character in the area by protecting our land and our water resources, specifically farmland and natural areas. We have about 21 acres under conservation easement right now, and we're about to add another 500. And many of those properties are along the lakes in this area. But I didn't come here to talk about Tall Pines, although I'd love to have that opportunity some other time. I came here to talk about a sister organization that we started about 6 years ago called Lake Country Clean Waters. How many of you have heard about Lake Country Clean Waters? Okay, just a few, but that's good. That's why I'm here. I want to build more awareness for this organization, which is also a nonprofit, and its mission is to serve as a catalyst to help Lake Country organizations protect improve Lake Country's lakes, rivers, stream, and groundwater. And we're trying to achieve this goal by promoting communication and acting as a soundboard for special districts, lake associations, conservation groups, and residents. So basically, we form, move over? Okay. Is this better? Too far. Okay. I was trying to hide from the sun. Okay. So basically, we formed this organization because we think that lakes have unique issues and concerns, one of which we are hearing about tonight. And by the way, I always like hearing Clay. I always learn so much when I listen to him. Shoreline restorations is something that we're trying to get the word out about and through Lake Country Clean Waters as well. But anyway, the lakes have their own unique issues, such as invasive aquatic species. Wake boats were brought up tonight. So we are sharing information between the lakes associations, the lake groups, and the Friends of Lakes, which I think can be a very valuable resource. So we are also educating people through various events. So we have quarterly meetings. One is coming up in October, where Ashapin Lake will share what they have implemented as far as wake boat regulations, which should be a very interesting quarterly meeting. And then we have an annual Healthy Lakes Conference every year, which we have done at 7 Seas in the past, but now we're usually doing it at the Oconomowoc Community Center. That's an all-day event with various speakers. Clay has spoke there too. So we are a membership organization. Associations can join us. We have various associations that belong to us right now, like Moose Lake, Ashapin Lake, Hunters Lake, North Lake, Okachi Lake, Pine Lake. We'd love to have the Lake Welfare Committee join us. But you can also join as a resident, and if you go to our website, which is Lake Country Clean Waters, a few of you got our brochures, lakecountrycleanwaters.org. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can also become a member. Our membership levels are anywhere from $10 to $1,000. So there you have it. Does anybody have any questions? I'm happy to field. Otherwise, I didn't bring enough brochures. I apologize. This is a great turnout. So we've got our brochure from Tall Pines and Lake Country Clean Waters on the tables. So thank you. Thanks.
Appreciate the time. Okay, next up, always an interesting part of the Lake Welfare presentation. Our next presenter has been with the City of Delafield Police Department for over 16 years. 7 years as a lieutenant. Before that, he was in IT, and I thought that was really interesting. I'd like you to please welcome Lieutenant Landon Nyron.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I'm not used to talking to a microphone, so I'll try and not yell. But just going to talk to you a little bit about our water safety patrol. The City of Delafield patrols Lake Nagawicca all summer and all year. We are out there pretty much every weekend in June, July, and August. We are still out on the lake these weekends because obviously the weather is still wonderful outside, so our lake patrol is still active out on the lake. This year, we just wanted to share with you, our patrol hours did increase. We were out there 601 hours this summer with our one patrol boat, usually staffed by 2 officers. That was actually a pretty significant increase. In 2021, we were out there 497 hours. With people getting out more, with just increased boat traffic in general, we did increase those hours. However, we did note that boaters were significantly more safe this year. Our contacts were about the same as they were last year. With that increase in boat patrol, we did not see a significant increase in violations. Most notably, we did participate in the July 4th Operation Dry Water, which is directed towards getting intoxicated boaters off the lake, and we found no violations through the 4th of July weekend. In fact, this year we had no operating while intoxicated violations on Lake Nagawicca, even with that 601 hours. So we think that really goes to show people, they've educated themselves, they're out there being safe, being responsible, and it shows. You know, we had contacts with over 95 boaters this year, and none of those led to any intoxicated use violations. We do, unfortunately, write tickets out there, but the majority of our tickets, if anybody has been greeted by one of us on the lake, they are safety related. So not enough flotation devices, operation in violation of the safety limits, so whether that's operation at above slow no wake in the buoyed areas or violation of the speed limits, especially on weekends. And I'll go over a little bit about our ordinances in a bit. Those are the majority of our citations. Things like registration violations, those tend to get warnings. We want to make sure everybody's out there enjoying the lake. Got to register your boats. If you have any questions about that, we're always willing to help people out, guide you through the proper numbering of your vessels, but we don't write a lot of tickets for registration. We're out there making sure everybody's being safe on the water, and that's the number one goal of our unit. So we did assist 5 people in distress this year and 9 vessels in distress. There were no fatalities on the lake, and any incidents were minor and without injury. So we were very, very lucky this year that anything that did result in an injury was minor, and damage was also minor this year. We had very few incidents out on the lake. So I think that goes hand in hand with the operating while intoxicated. We had none of those this year, and very minimal incidents on the lake involving collisions of boats or boating accidents. So moving forward, we obviously are going to be out there next year. We will probably be out there through this weekend and most likely the next, based on weather forecasts. And then we'll probably be done for the year unless there are water rescues needed. Otherwise, we will be back out in full force Memorial Day weekend in 2023. We do not operate ice patrols. We don't have any ice units here in the city of Delafield, so we only respond to ice incidents as needed. We haven't had a lot of issues out on our lake. Our lake does not allow any vehicles on the ice other than ATVs and snowmobiles. So we're fortunate in that we don't get pickup trucks going through the ice or things like that, because it is a spring-fed lake. There's open water a lot of the year, even when it gets cold. And so you won't see those pickup trucks out there, so that's fortunate for us. We don't have to deal with those types of issues. A couple things to share. We like to share it at all meetings, especially for people who are new to the lake or who are trying to learn information about our local ordinances. They are posted at every single public launch and semi-public launch. We have the 2 major launches here on Nagawicca, the county launch, which is right behind us, which is public. Anyone can pay a fee and launch from this launch here. And then we have the Bleecker Street Boat Launch, which is available to residents of the city of Delafield and the village of Neshota. Those launches are the majority of outside boat traffic, and then there's the many homeowners that have launches as well. But I want to do as much education as we can, and so the number one question we get, what is the speed limit on Lake Nagawicca? Anybody know? 45 miles per hour. But, except on weekends and holidays, it does reduce. So, and I always want to make sure I get the times right. Between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m., it's 25 miles per hour during the months of June, July, and August on any Saturday, Sunday, and holiday. And we are out enforcing that. We do have a radar on our boat, and we can actually figure out how fast you're going on your boat. It does take into account the movement speed of our boats and can tell us if we do have people in violation. The big violations we see are the violation of the slow no wakes. Most of our shoreline is buoyed, and obviously if you are on the wrong side of the buoy operating at above slow no wake, that's a violation that we take very seriously. We just heard a long presentation about erosion of shorelines. We've got swimmers, we've got all sorts of things going on within that usually 300 feet of shore. We want people to be slowing down out there. We have the other areas where it is slow no wake because of hazards. We've got the sandbar in the channel going into St. John's Bay. And although it is not buoyed, St. John's Island has the same shoreline restrictions. And so we ask people to obey that slow no wake when you're in the vicinity of St. John's Island, both to protect the ecosystem around the island, and it is a popular place for people to swim. But I will once again, as we do every summer, encourage people, please do not go onto St. John's Island without permission from the owner. We get complaints on a pretty regular basis if you have not received permission from St. John's to go onto the island. It is technically private property. It is not a DNR or state-owned island. Moving on from speed limits, just a little bit extra information. 300 feet is where the buoys are supposed to be, but regardless of a buoy or not, 300 feet of shoreline is slow no wake. And we all know what slow no wake means. Yeah, you cannot create a wake or 3 miles an hour, whichever is slower. And so if you can drive your boat at 10 miles an hour and not create a wake, it still means 3 miles per hour in a slow no wake area. Because not only does it mean we want to prevent those wakes in those areas, it is a speed restriction as well. So it's 3 miles per hour or no wake, whichever is the slowest. And then after sunset, or 30 minutes of sunset, anybody know the speed limit? 10 miles per hour. It's not slow no wake, it's 10 miles per hour. We do get an occasional phone call saying there's a boat traveling at above slow no wake after sunset. Not a violation, it's 10 miles an hour. As long as they're well lit and properly lit, they can operate at that 10 miles an hour. And then we do have another distance requirement out on our lake per ordinance, and it's the 150 feet rule. Anybody know what that applies to? It's actually if you are towing a skier, you cannot be within 150 feet of any bather, swimmer, or within the limits of any channel, and please, for the love of God, don't tow skiers through the kettle. We have an ordinance against it, but also it's going to be a really bad day if they fall in there, if you can even manage to get up to speed to pull a skier through the kettle. It is actually against ordinance, but that would be the least of your problems, is a ticket you get for towing a skier through the kettle. But yeah, 150 feet from any other swimmer or bather when you are towing a skier. And then the same restrictions, it's kind of common sense. There's a 300-foot limit for towing skiers from shoreline as well. You're not going to be at slow no wake if you're towing a skier, so it's kind of a redundant ordinance, but it is in there. You can, if you're doing a 90-degree straight out from shoreline, tow a skier. However, slow no wake still does apply, so it would be a challenge to tow at those speeds. And then, as always, we ask people, please don't throw, litter, or dump any cans or any other rubbish in the lake, on the lake, or on the shorelines. We have a very good lake. It's beautiful out there, and it is kept relatively clean. And that's because of everybody here who cares about the lake, and we do appreciate everyone and their efforts to maintain the cleanliness and the ecosystems we have out here. So that's all I have. I'm willing to answer any questions anybody has. On a stand-up paddleboard, you do need access to a life jacket. Don't have to be wearing it like you do on a jet ski, but you do need access to one. In the back.
I lived in the channel
We haven't seen a significant increase in people traversing the channels. I think, we do have a fair number of people who come launch at the public launches. I don't know if they're looking for fishing or other things in the channels, but they are marked at the entrances that it is a slow no wake area. And if you do observe someone behind your residence operating at above slow no wake, we do encourage you to call us. If you can get a registration number, we will make contact with those boaters and at least educate them about what they're doing and the damage it can cause. But we have not had a significant increase in those types of incidences. And the county launch is popular every weekend. But over the past few years, we haven't seen a noticeable increase in those types of offenses, or even a significant increase in public launches either. Yeah.
Couple of questions. The local scuba diving club
Mhm.
uses the launcher, and they have their flag out.
Yes.
So how far away do you need to be from a scuba diving flag?
The scuba flag, we prefer 300 feet. It's the same as a swimmer. I would have to look at the specific distance. I don't know the specific distance for a diving flag. If anyone can help me out on it, I will take it.
Well, typically, the diving flag would be right by the ropes.
Yep.
The swim area.
Yes.
It's not way out in the middle of the lake.
Yep.
where it's by the
So,
hillside.
just safety. 300 feet is the rule we give to pretty much everything. Is we want to avoid those, especially the divers.
Not that uncommon. Second question, not that uncommon for me to be sitting on our deck and, how sound carries over water dramatically.
Yes.
And you see wakeboard boats out there with just blasting the music. And is there any sound ordinance or is there any rules on that? I mean, at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, blasting is pretty.
Our nuisance noise ordinance in the city of Delafield is extremely vague. It is simply defined as unreasonable and unnecessary noise. There are no time limits. There's no decibel level. It is a very short ordinance, and that is the extent of it. It's something we deal with regularly. We encourage being a good neighbor, even if you don't live on the lake. That doesn't mean you come here and blast your sound system as loud as you can and then jet off. If something like that is causing an issue, you can give us a call. We'll come out and check it out, and we respond to all those calls. We'll stand out there and we'll make the determination if it qualifies as unreasonable and unnecessary. Our goal usually in those situations, if we're getting calls and we see somebody who's cruising around causing an issue, because usually if the boat's super loud, the sound system's super loud, those things tend to coincide with additional violations, and we will find those additional violations and address them.
One last question.
Okay.
So right away, so there's a lot of regattas on the lake, sailboats, and there's also a lot of wave runners.
Yeah.
Have a pontoon boat. What are those right away rules, and who has right away?
Sailboats, give them as much as you can. That's a courtesy and the rules. PWCs, personal watercrafts, and wave runners, they should be the most attentive, but they are a vessel the same as a pontoon and any other boat. However, they are restricted on their distance from other boats as well. And so they have to stay away from people who are towing. Skiers, that's the big thing we see, is we'll see a jet ski cruise right by somebody towing a skier. Same rules apply, the 150-foot rule. And also from each other, the personal watercrafts, if they're operating in circular motion causing hazardous wake, or if they're operating within each other, at above slow no wake, then we go have a chat, and it's usually education time for those types of situations. Yep. Right there in the black shirt.
Out of curiosity, what was that cigarette boat doing that you pulled over this
I don't know. It was not me out on the lake. That was probably Burke. He looks a lot like me. I'm guessing. I can't guess, unfortunately.
Is there a motor sound, so not music, but is there a motor sound limit if you're running a boat with cutouts?
Cutouts are not allowed on the lake. That is a violation of the ordinance. All the way in the back. You've had your hand up for a while.
What are the best practices to get a new slow no-wake buoy installed? Just because we're new residents on the end of Evergreen Drive.
Okay.
So Zastro Bay is right there, and there's two clear slow no-wakes off of that point there. But I don't know how many times, I mean, I'm only 47 and I feel like an 8-year-old man get off my lawn that are just zooming from Zastro that kind of cut that corner. They're way closer than 300. And in fact, a couple times this summer, they were like 50 feet from us swimming. So I think there are people that probably they don't live on the lake, but they clearly are like cutting that corner, and it's pretty dangerous.
Yeah. You can email the Department of Public Works. They're the ones that put our buoys out. And so you can contact them. The main contact is available on our website, cityofdelafield.com. And they're the ones who place the buoys every year. Yes?
So the encounters that you have out there, is it mostly residents or is it people that don't live on the lake?
We do not keep that statistic. Yes.
Is there any way to get a hold of you when you're on patrol?
Yes, you can contact our dispatch center. That's 24 hours a day. It's the Waukesha County Communications Center.
And they will again,
They will contact us. Yep, we have a radio on our boat, and they're in direct contact with us all the time.
so call the police department and then with Waukesha and then they get a hold of you.
Yep, quickest way is to call the dispatch center directly, and it's the 262-446-5070 phone number. If you ever need police assistance and it's not an emergency, that's our non-emergency number. If you call our administrative line, you have to go through a phone tree. It's not super long, but that number, you call the 446-5070, and a dispatcher will answer the phone. They might ask you to hold on if they've got a bunch of calls, but they will pick up, and it's a person you get to right away, and those are our dispatchers. Yes? We do not.
What's the phone number again? One more time?
It's 262-446-5070, and that's the Waukesha County Communications Center. For any issues in Delafield, that's the number to call. Unless you need a copy of a report or something, then you call our administrative lines Monday through Friday. Any other questions?
So if you pull over I have a pontoon boat, what are you looking for?
Our safety check is pretty straightforward. It's the things that are required. Your registration numbers, your certificate of registration. I would assume you're exempt from boater safety, but if anyone appears to be of the age that would require boater safety, which is the 1989 requirement, we would check them for boater safety. We're going to then do, the simple way we do it is everybody hold up a life jacket. That way we know everybody has access to, and there are enough life jackets on board. If I hold up an infant's life jacket, doesn't work that way. So everybody has to have an appropriate life jacket on board. If the vehicle is large enough, they have to have the throwable PFD. Then we are going to check battery, make sure the battery is covered and the terminals are covered. And if required, if the fire extinguisher is on board. So that's our simple safety check. Yes.
The local Coast Guard auxiliary will gladly do a safety check inspection of your boat and let you know, what's required as well as suggested, equipment safety things.
And if you give us a call and we've got a boat patrol working or we've got an officer available, we will also help you out. DNR wardens are also more than willing to help you out with boater safety because our goal is to get everybody safe out there. We want everybody to go out, enjoy the lake, and go home safely at the end of the day. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much, and be safe out there.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So two things. Number one, I say this to people all the time. We are lucky because the Delafield Police Department does patrol the lake, but they're not out trying to bust up people's time. They're not ticketing people, they're just trying to give warnings. The other thing is just day before yesterday, the police boat towed somebody up the river quite a ways, and they didn't get stuck. I thought that was pretty impressive to pull somebody up there, get them rescued, and get back down. So I think we're pretty. Yeah. Yeah, so it didn't have much. I'm just wondering how long it took you to catch it. So anyway, I think we're fortunate to have the police department that we do monitoring our lake. So okay, so the rest of this evening is really going to be focusing on fish. So our next speaker has been a resident for 20 years, Steve, or so. We owe a great, anybody who catches fish, especially walleye on this lake, probably owes a debt of gratitude to Steve Seibel. Every winter he runs the frostbite fishery. So if it looks like a grumpy old man out there, especially on the north end of the lake, that's Steve's doing. So I'd like to welcome up Steve Seibel.
Okay. So anybody that, if you live up toward the north side of the lake and you, about the second Saturday in February, you see a whole bunch of people out on the lake. That's the frostbite fishery. Where it started is I had an opportunity to be able to see a presentation by Ben Heisner, who's going to be talking a little bit later, at a Lake Welfare Committee. And Ben talked about extended growth walleye. And it intrigued me, and I thought, well, you know what, we have to make some money and see if we can actually do this. So in 2013, we had our first frostbite fishery. It was in my garage. Okay, that's where we staged it out of. I think we had about 40 people, and we made a few $100s, whatever the situation is. And we started accumulating some money for it. And I had conversations with Ben about getting permits to be able to stock. And I don't want to go into his thunder here, but the DNR stocks our lake with walleyes every 2 years. And we were able to eventually negotiate, and beginning, what year was it, Ben? 2018, we as an organization, the Nagashota Shores Lake Association, actually were able to stock some walleyes. So currently, we're typically doing 10 to 12,000 walleyes every 2 years. We did 10 one year, 12,000 another year. This year, we're going to stock 13,000. Now, one thing that we've actually seen happening is the walleyes have really gone up in price. They were like $1.60 a piece, years back. Then they went to $1.80. This year, they're $2.35 a piece. So to stock the 13,000 walleyes that we're going to be doing in the next 2 to 3 weeks, it costs $30,000. So I've got a little commercial going out. I've got some brochures out for you that describes what we do, how much it costs to get in. It is a really good time. We give free lunch. We have fish prizes. We go over to the Legion Hall in Okauchee afterwards, and we have raffles. We have auctions, and we do actually pretty good. In the COVID year, we made $12,000. This January, we made 18. So it's been growing and growing. One of the things we're doing differently this year, or that we started this year, is we're looking for business sponsors. There's in the papers that, Gary, if you can maybe get those handed out, you have different opportunities to be able to help out that way. If you don't have a business, and if you want to donate, Nagashota Shores is a 501c3 corporation. And any of those donations that we have do go toward actually the stocking of walleyes. And again, 100% of the proceeds actually goes to that. And I'm not going to steal Ben's thunder because he's going to come up and see if we've helped out doing a good job along with the DNR. So any questions? Turn that over to you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah, Steve does some excellent work, and it goes unheralded unless you're an ice fisher person. So yeah, take note this February. at the north end of the lake and all the ice fishing shanties. So last up, our last presenter is the Wisconsin DNR fisheries biologist, Ben Hessner. Is that pronounced right? Ben Heisner. He's passing things out, so we'll let him. Tell you what, I'll trade you if you want. I'll pass them out and you can talk.
There you go.
All right.
Good evening, everybody. How's it going tonight? So it was really a nice surprise to come up to the door here and see some nice aquatic plants on the screen. And really, I'm going to end up here probably again towards the end of the presentation, but habitat is always the biggest driver for any healthy fishery. Habitat, habitat, habitat. And that includes water quality, and the aquatic plants that you talk about restoring along the shoreline, as well as the near shore woody habitat. That's a big driver for a healthy system. So thanks, Clay, for that presentation. Also, I wanted to give you a little background about my history as a department employee. I grew up in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, and I did a lot of trips down the Bark River as a child. So I have a deep connection to the Bark River and all the systems. Connected to it, like Nemabins as well. But I still recreate on those waters to this day. I live in Fort Atkinson now, but I've been working for the department for 29 years, and I've been fortunate enough to have the bulk of that career in lake country, sampling different fisheries throughout this beautiful area of the state. And I can honestly say I think Nagawicca is probably top 5 for sure. As far as fisheries go. It's a wonderful fishery. It was a one-time 2-story fishery, meaning it's super deep, has cold water component to it. Used to have Cisco. And at one time, we actually stocked heavily trout in this water. Not really necessary, given the health of the system. It's kind of anyway, we'll get off of that. But we haven't seen a huge number of Cisco out there. We've done some sampling, so they've since declined, and that's likely the reasoning is likely eutrophication from nutrient loading and increased productivity of the lake. It's a kind of in-depth description, but if you ever see any Cisco up on shore in fall, they spawn and sometimes they die. If you see any, I appreciate you contacting me and letting me know, because we do want to keep our eye out for them. They're hard to detect. My contact information, by the way, is on the last page of the report that I handed out, and I'd encourage you guys to definitely reach out to me if you have any fisheries questions. So what we do for our fisheries program is sample. We rotate lakes. Obviously, there's like 80 lakes in Waukesha County, and that's my area that I'm assigned to. And so it's hard to get around to all of them, but we do rotate. Our higher profile lakes like Nagawicca, we get in and net every 5 to 7 years. And one of the things that I've realized is that we're going to do Nagawicca next spring and do a population estimate on walleye. It's time to get our nets in here. So what happens is, if you can imagine, if we got a 2-person, 3-person crew, we have to rotate lakes, and we only have about 5-6 lakes that we can hit on a 5-6 year rotation, because we can only do one lake a year. So next year, 2023, we're going to be doing a population estimate. You'll be seeing some nets in the water, and we'll be doing similar to a survey as we did in 2017. In the report that I handed out, we did a population estimate in 2017, came up with about 0.9 adults per acre. Our previous estimate was about 0.4 adults per acre. So the initial stocking that the Wisconsin DNR did in 2013 was at a rate of about 5 large fingerling walleyes per acre. So let me describe a little bit of what that means, and this is probably what Steve was referring to. Was I get pretty charged up about walleye. It is my favorite species. It also, by the way, is the most popular species in the state, ranking at about, or about 63% of the folks in our most recent survey chose walleye as their number one. That by far has always been the lead. So it's also my favorite, but the small fingerling walleyes are about 1.5 inches, and they're harvested in June usually. And these small fingerling walleyes are what we used to stock prior to making large fingerlings available. The large fingerlings became available about 2013 because we had this program called the Wisconsin Walleye Initiative, and it's been funded for ever since 2013. And we hope that continues. It's through our GOP funds. It's not actually sport fish restoration funds. It just comes from our actual state taxes. And that walleye initiative has supported about close to 600,000 DNR produced fish every year. And in addition, we've worked cooperatively with some private growers, and we're over 1 million statewide. So the good news is, while we're building a fishery here on Nagawicca Lake, we're also building fisheries right around you. So that'll spread out a lot of fishing pressure. There's no longer like Waukesha County, the only place you can catch a walleye is Lac La Belle. Not the case anymore. We've always had pine and Oconomowoc, which are also natural reproducing, but not enough to sustain the populations. Waters. There's only a few waters in Waukesha County that actually have some detection of natural reproduction, and that includes mainly the Oconomowoc River chain and the Bark River chain. The lakes that we do see NR include Oconomowoc, Pine, Lac La Belle, Nagawicca, and the Mobbins. That's pretty much it. So you guys are pretty special here. So basically we can detect some level of natural reproduction in non-stocked years. So in other words, we'll do a fall survey and we'll see 7-inch fish. Those 7-inch fish, which leads me to the large fingerlings, or what we were talking about with our large fingerling production, those 7-inch fish are usually harvested in late September and into October. So those large fingerlings, like I said, we can detect in non-stocked years natural reproduction on those systems. Any questions so far? I would like to make this interactive if possible. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to butt in at any time. Yeah, go ahead.
What's your predator fish, killing the population?
It's not necessarily always the case. It's most of the time we're seeing the decline statewide, especially in the north right now. The decline of walleyes is most likely an early stage development, not necessarily a predator. And most of the times it's a multitude of factors. So it's not just natural reproduction, it's survivability up to, even fall. And that's why the large fingerlings work better. They just avoid a whole lot of complications with early life stage development, as well as your point, predation by other species. Out here on Nagawicca, the reason getting back to why it is such a healthy fishery, it has a very diverse panfish population, nice sized panfish. It has bass, both bass, smallmouth and largemouth bass, and northern pike. So northern pike they can compete directly with walleyes for both food and space and prey upon directly. So that's your main predator out here. But panfish as well can be pretty strong predators if they're overabundant. So they can prey on both eggs as well as fry. And that's why the June fingerlings, which I was kind of alluding to earlier, they're only 1.5 inches, and they're not real strong swimmers. We harvest them when they run out of plankton. And that's why we harvest them in June, so they're hungry. They haven't made that conversion to piscivorous or fish-eating stage of their life stage. And so they basically are pretty good food for all the panfish at 1.5 inches. And that's why the large fingerlings have been so successful. So getting into spring, we're going to be setting our fyke nets out there. If you guys have one that's in your way, just feel free to contact me. You can track down my number on the report, or you can Google it. You can always see it on a DNR. We have a contacts page for DNR fisheries biologists. So feel free to look me up if our net's in your way or whatever, but that's what we'll be doing. We'll be marking walleye. Yeah, yeah. I thought I heard something.
There's a ghost
It's like, I heard something, but I didn't.
How long will the nets be out there?
Yeah, so the question is, how long will the nets be out there? What we have to do is mark a significant portion of the population, and that's approximately 10%. And, you know, if I had to take a stab at it, I think we're between 2 and 3 adults per acre, so it could take probably about 3-4 weeks to mark enough fish, and then we'll be out of there. We'll pull the nets out and do the rest of the survey using electrofishing gear. So we also use electrofishing gear, and this report shows some catch rates. Catch rates can go up and down depending on conductivity, weather conditions, and everything else. It's kind of hit or miss. But nonetheless, I included the data in there, and there's a catch rate graph that shows a pretty solid increase in the catch rate using electrofishing gear. We're able to come out and do single night sampling and electrofishing. And we'll do electrofishing also for the largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, panfish populations, and then we'll complete a comprehensive report. So that's about what I do, and you got my report there. Are there any other questions at this point? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
What effect do the carps have on this particular lake? To me, it seems like I've been noticing more. I don't know if it's just, my observation, but it seems like.
Yeah, I would say that carp are not considered a problem on Nagawicca. Not to say that they're not on the radar. They're always on the radar. We're always looking for them. We haven't collected a whole lot of carp out here. The ones we have collected are pretty large in size. What we usually look for is size structure of the common carp as well as catch rate, but like I said, catch rate can be kind of variable. But basically the size of the carp indicates, and the low catch rate indicates basically that they're not a problem. When you start to see a ton of smaller carp, then that becomes a real concern. So I would say basically it's not on the radar as far as a problem at this point. I have 2 problem children, Lac La Belle and Big Muskego. Those have real problems with carp. Yes, sir.
A number of years ago, we had quite a few zebra mussels on our shore. They seem to have gone down. What are you seeing, or what are you?
Yeah, there's a lot of literature on that. There's like this boom and bust as they initially fill the void after being introduced, they boom, and then they just die off slowly. And it's a very common occurrence across lakes. In fact, I've probably talked to 2 different lake groups this month, or not this month, but in the last 2 months. And basically, I've had a lot of reports of that. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. Some people view it as, oh no, it's going to get all turbid out here, but not necessarily. Not with the proper aquatic plants in the water, because they'll take up all that nutrients and keep down that internal nutrient loading. Yeah.
Yes, a number of years ago when the DNR had a display at the state fair, I bought a poster depicting all the fish, and I've been trying to locate a duplicate copy for a friend, and apparently it's out of print. Any idea if I'll go back in print or where I might get one? You know what I'm talking about?
Not exactly. Is it just a small, like...
So it's a poster depicting freshwater fish of Wisconsin.
UW-Madison sells those. I think you can order them online. In fact, they've done some really nice artwork. So the University of Wisconsin Extension, if you, I hate to say it, but Google it. If you Google UW Extension and fish, they got some really neat posters there, including one that's like 160 species, which is about the total for Wisconsin. You can add in another 20 invasive species. Yeah.
Thank you.
You mentioned mosquito with the carp issue there. What is the issue
Yeah, there's a pretty healthy perch population in both little and big Muskego. And they do fluctuate over time, just like most species. You get strong year classes and weak ones, but and fishing pressure has a lot to do with it. A lot of these fisheries are very pulse fishery oriented, so word gets out, everybody's there. But like I said, luckily we got walleye all over the place, so should spread out the pressure. Yes? I'm glad you brought that up. No, we may have caught one or two, but they're ferry fish, we call them, you know, like the fish ferries come and drop them in anglers. But you bring up a good point because I get a lot of pressure to introduce muskies to Nagawicca, Namabans because of their depth and size. Well, especially Nagawicca. It's viewed as having the potential for an excellent muskie fishery. And tempted, but there's a lot of steps that go into introducing new species to water. I don't think we'd have any problem doing that. We'd have to do what's called a environmental impact statement to do that. And then once we go through that, we'd also have to have some public support. So show of hands, who wants muskies in Nagawicca Lake? 1, 2, 3. Who doesn't want muskies in their lake? Here, Nagawicca. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 6, 7. That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up because there's only so many predators it can take, and this is a naturally reproducing northern pike population. So I've always kind of viewed it as, you know, let's just leave it with northern pike. And I also want to talk about panfish and the effects of high walleye populations. So you're definitely going to see a reduction in panfish. And this can be viewed as good or bad, depending on how you look at it. The good part of having a lot of walleye out there and keeping the panfish down is trophic levels, basically, and biomanipulation. Having fewer panfish out there allows for a lot more plankton. Plankton consumes algae, so it can result in better water clarity. Also, the lower density of panfish will provide for better growth rates because fewer panfish means they're not competing for space and food, and they have better growth rates. So hope that we see a lot better panfish size structure in our spring netting next year. And we're definitely going to keep an eye on it, and that's one of the things we have to look at also is growth. I also included a growth chart in there, shows comparison to statewide average. We have a lot of data statewide, but Nagawicca in comparison is above statewide average, and that's because it pretty much takes into account the whole state, and we're at a warmer water, faster growth. So that being said, yeah, it'll be interesting to monitor growth of those walleyes over time, and when we start to see a decrease in the growth rates of the walleye, we're going to have to pull back on the stocking a little bit, you know, make sure that we get quality fish as well as good numbers. One thing I do want to mention is the fish refuge up here on the Bark River. There's also a fish refuge downstream on the Bark River in between Namaban and Nagawicca, and there's a fish refuge on the upstream. That's to protect those walleyes in spring. It would also protect any northern pike that may be traveling upstream. So that being said, there is natural reproduction here, and we want to keep monitoring that. Yeah, go ahead.
If you were to put in like one muskie per 20 surface acres, would that have any positive or negative impact on what's already out there?
You're talking like a very low density of stocking? Yeah. Yeah, like I said, right now it's not on the table. I don't think it would have a huge impact, and it would probably end up in a non-fishable, non-detectable fish population. So that being said, we wouldn't waste our muskies are, by the way, 5 times more expensive than the walleyes. When it comes to our statewide muskie production, we're not putting new muskie waters on the table for stocking because we can barely fill the quotas that we have. That being said, it's, I would say we wouldn't support that from a department standpoint because it wouldn't be a good use of our product. Go ahead.
You just mentioned about the walleyes, that if the number got too high, you would stop stocking. What number would that be?
Like I said, as long as they're growing fine.
So it's not the number, it's the length?
Yeah, and there is a density dependent growth issue, and it may occur. It all depends on the productivity of the water. I did want to mention the forage species out here. You've got a variety of smaller, what we commonly refer to as dicky fish, and it includes, lake chub suckers. You've got shiners. You've got brook silver sides. But you also have white suckers, and the white sucker population is very strong out here. So I anticipate that we're going to continue to get good growth rates out here. But I would anticipate if we reach a level of 4 or 5 adults per acre, we may see some density dependent growth. Right now, we're probably in 2 to 3 range. And by the time we get the 22 stocking, by the way, I did send you a permit today, Steve. Okay. And sent the 22 stocking permit for 13,000. You put those in there, 4 or 5 years down the road, we may be at that density of like, okay, it's time to slow down on the stocking rate.
Milwaukee's kind of there already.
Yeah, we did. We cut the stocking of walleye last year. Deferred the walleye, well, no, excuse me, be this year. We deferred the stocking quota of 37,000 into Pewaukee because growth had decreased. And we've seen an average increase of about 1.5 inches for the pumpkin seeds and bluegills, the sunfish out there. So that's really encouraging to see an improvement in that pan fishery.
Can you touch on what Milwaukee Lake has done to increase their walleye population?
Yeah, they also are a part of the walleye initiative. And that's why Steve and the Nagashota Shores, did I get that right? Nagashota Shores Lake Association has paired to match almost the stocking rate of what Pewaukee is doing because they have reached that level of density dependent growth, and we've had to cut back on stocking temporarily until we see improvements in that growth. But they have also done fry stocking out there, and fry stocking is a lot of work. So you're welcome to do that. I support any efforts to put walleye in any water body, but I will say, it has very mixed results. They did it for about 10 years, fry stocking. I shouldn't say that. That's not quite right. They did it for quite a while and was very little success, but then all of a sudden, boom. And that's why we pulled the stocking of large fingerlings this year, because last year, in a non-stocked year, we detected 30 per mile in our electrofishing catch rates. So that was a good indication that the fry stocking works. Like we better put the brakes on and keep an eye on it for a while before. So it's not an exact science, but we monitor as much as we can to keep an eye on them. Good questions. Yes.
And just on the topic of aquatic invasive species, brought up zebramussels, with your Asian water milfoil, do you see any kind of winners or losers from a species standpoint in fishery?
That's a really tricky question because there's a lot of conflicting interests there. But I think all aquatic plants have their place. You just want them to play nicely with others. I know we've used that before. You've got a nice diversity of aquatic plants out here. I'm not aware of any major milfoil issues. Is that correct? Do you guys have any major milfoil? Just small portions. I mean, some lakes and curly leaf, yeah. I know, and I'm not an aquatic plant expert by any means, but I will say that like down in the Mobbin Lakes, there's anglers fighting for the remaining milfoil patches out there. So there are conflicting concepts. Some places they boom and they take off the milfoil. I think with this water clarity and the health of it, I don't think it's going to be a big concern anytime soon. But yeah, in some places it's a limiting factor. There are no aquatic plants, and then all of a sudden these small patches of milfoil become very valuable to fisheries, and you can really, really find high concentrations of all sorts of panfish species around those milfoil beds, so they can be very valuable on a system that it's limiting factor. Out here, I don't believe it is a limiting factor, so you should target them, try to hand pull them, because you do have a good diversity of aquatic plants as well as all the wood in the water, which is also very good. Anybody do any fish sticks projects out here lately? I know they did one many years ago. Couple cribs, but I'm talking about the fish sticks. Yeah. Yeah, I would encourage folks to take a look at our Clean Waters program and our grant program for putting fish sticks in the water. It provides good nearshore habitat as well as wildlife habitat. Fish sticks are basically just large, fresh cut trees that are anchored to the shoreline to provide habitat. Got a question up front?
About fish sticks. I was planning on doing one for a possible Eagle project.
Hmm.
Is there a way that I could? A crib. Yeah, a fish crib.
Yeah, the way fish cribs as well as fish sticks work, it's all about riparian zone of interest. It's similar to a pier project. So when you own the property, like let's say we're looking at the yacht club here, and the lot line's up against the county, and then the lot line's over here, the riparian zone of interest is a straight line out into the water, perpendicular to shore. And as long as it's in the riparian zone of interest, you can put it in there. You can put a fish crib, you can put fish sticks. You may or may not need a permit, but I encourage you to contact me and I'll help you through that process. There's a whole list of exemptions for these types of things. Like for instance, the exemptions for a fish crib include they have to be 5 feet below the surface, so they're not causing any potential navigational hazard. They also need to be made out of natural material, with the exception of fasteners, fastening devices, screws, cables, whatever. But you want to keep it as natural as possible. And fresh cut wood as well. And the riparian zone of interest, you have to have permission from that riparian that you're putting it in the zone of interest. So there's quite a few exemptions. I can send you that exemptions checklist and I'll be happy to work with you, or any property owners if you have an interest in putting wood in the water, because wood in the water is good. No, doesn't matter what species. I will say that there's been a little research showing that you'll have a little better lifespan with hardwoods. Naturally, it makes sense.
If we're dropping a tree or something like that, and somebody wants it for a fish stick, how do I donate that?
Yeah, it doesn't always work out. All depends on if you can connect with that person who's doing a project, so you can have them take down your information and possibly work with them. But basically, I don't get enough interest in it to really like keep a log of people who are willing to donate boards. I don't do that. I know there's a gentleman back here who's been waiting patiently.
Just curious, are you familiar with the fish regulations for big mosquito?
Yes, I am.
You are. I'm kind of surprised that more Waukesha County lakes haven't transitioned over to their regulation schedule for the various species of fish, because myself and a number of local anglers on big mosquito feel that it's a very successful program out there. Much tighter restrictions on catch, what you can keep. One largemouth bass per day, minimum of 18 inches. One northern pike per day, a minimum of 40 inches. I think it's 10 aggregate panfish, minimum of 8 inches.
Yeah, the reason that has such restrictive special regulations is because we put so much effort in the rehabilitation of it. In 1996, we chemically treated the whole lake, killed every fish, started over, stocked 19 different species, in 1997. Oh, I wish I was that age again. Because I did it all. I did all the stocking, transferring fish. Back then we used to transfer fish from water body to water body, if you can believe that, but VHS and everything, which is viral hemorrhagic septicemia, a virus. That came around in about 2003, and that put the stop to all transfers of any fish. We do have the ability to transfer downstream now, but that's the reason why it has very restrictive special regulations. And for every catch and release angler that loves those catch and release regulations, I have the same number of anglers that say, what God giveth, the DNR taketh away. So they don't like restrictive regs, and they want to eat them all. So it's a tough balance. Not every lake, you know, it's always trying to find the best fit. And for big Muskego, I always try to tell people it's a different system because it's so sensitive to fish kills, and it's a shallow lake where we have a lot of invasive species that kind of tend to take over because of the fact that it doesn't really handle like strong winters or very hot summers very well. We get summer kills, we get winter kills. Next thing you know, you're down to the most tolerant species, which include common carp, bullhead, or anything else related to that.
It's got a lot of fish in it.
It sure does. That's a very productive system.
It's a great lake to take children or grandchildren because you catch fish.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I like, and that's what I'd love to see on some of these more local lakes.
I
Just more fish.
I appreciate that feedback because we do have an 18-inch size limit on walleye out here, and I did want to talk about that a little bit. And the reason that 18 inches is important from a biologist standpoint who loves walleye is it really protects them another year or two before they're vulnerable to harvest. So we are getting a lot of gametes back in the system, giving them a chance to spawn once or twice before they're vulnerable to harvest. The walleyes mature at about age 4, depending on if they're male or female. Males a little sooner, precocious males, and then about 5 years they're really starting to come into it, and that's right about the time that they're at that 18-inch size limit. So yeah, downstream we have the 28-inch size limit on LaBelle. Not exactly the best fit, but we need to evaluate it just to see how it's doing. But providing those catch and release opportunities is also important but as well as the harvest opportunities. We have to have those too.
You take the yellow sign that's just right over here, that bull launch, there's only 2 fish on there. There's nothing regarding panfish, there's nothing regarding largemouth bass, there's nothing for northern pike. If I was a stranger who just came to this lake and you look at that yellow sign, it says nothing about those 3 species.
Yeah, for our regulation signage, we basically just post anything that is special regulations. Everything else is standard statewide regulations. So the yellow signs are just special regs. Any other questions? Right in front?
So, one question is, do you have anything that's gonna be marking those nets that you're doing the surveys with?
That's a good question. So first of all, the nets are attached to shore, and they have a series of corks on them that float, and you can see it pretty clear, and it's also tied to shore. And then the rest of the net will be submerged, and you won't be able to see it, and you could hit it with your boat. And by the way, this is happening in late March, early April. So a lot of the boaters aren't really out yet. But at the end of the net portion, the trap net, the fish swim along shore, by the way. They hit that lead with the corks, and they swim out to shore. Our leads are about 75 feet long usually. And at the end of the trap, which the fish swim along the cork line and get into the trap, at the end of the trap is a buoy. So you can see a buoy that'll say DNR on it. Well, there'll be a lot along this shore because this is the major spawning. There'll be a few on the island out here. There may be a couple along that bay over there on the, I guess, the southwest shore of that bay. other than that, we aren't able to get any nets in on the shallow side over there. And in fact, we do most of our trend analysis on the seashore, and that's in the report as well. We typically put in over there at the, what do they call it, the town launch, and come around this bay and up past the 7 Seas. Another question here.
Yeah, so regarding the stocking and how the balance is done today, I posed the question because I've looked online or in a book about stocking in the past. You know, since we talked a lot about walleye, we'll use that as an example, where it actually completely dwarfs the numbers that we're using today. Now, granted, I love the fact that we're using larger growth instead of like fry and, you know, maybe small fingerlings. But with that being said, tremendous amounts of fish that they would stock. Talking to some people that I know, they're, you know, in their 70s, would talk about how fantastic the pan fishing was, and as well as the walleye fishing was, et cetera, in the 70s and the 80s. And then being that the balance that we have today, but it's nothing even close to the stories that I'm hearing, how does that balance come into play? Are they just fish tales that I'm hearing from people that used to live on the lake?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't want to say it, but yeah, you did. Thanks. It's all hearsay, and people only remember the good times. I don't remember all the times I went fishing and didn't catch anything. So, but basically, first off, we used to have about 350 employees in the 70s for the fisheries program. We're down to about 202. Our budgets are a little tighter. We haven't had a license fee, blah, blah, blah. We don't produce as many fish, but we're much wiser with our fish. It doesn't take as much, you know. I don't know if you guys ever heard of a shotgun treatment. That's just throwing something at it, see if it works. That's what a lot of those numbers come from. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't evaluate them. Most of them were smaller fish, a lot of fry stocks. So I really can't say that stocking is necessarily a really good thing always. I mean, usually stocking is kind of, the analogy I use is like a vice grips. Like, I can't get that nut off there, so I'm going to put the vice grips on it and just try harder. But it's not the best tool to use, not only from a financial standpoint, but also from a genetic standpoint. You want to make sure that you have local adaptation and preserve the genetic traits of that water body. So I think you guys have a great fishery here, and stocking isn't necessarily an answer to a better fishery. And
yeah, less humans.
that's a fact. Less use, better habitat. Here we are, full circle. I told you I'd come back to it. Habitat's the biggest driver. That's a fact. So more wood in the water, more aquatic plants, less nutrient loading, less resuspension of solids in the water, nutrients. That's the way we can protect the water and maintain a good fishery. Yes, sir. Well, out here it depends on which side you're on, but when you go out, you want to get to a depth that not only is deep enough to meet that 5 feet below the surface requirement, but you also want to be not too far where it's not usable. You don't want to go put it in 100 feet of water or 90 feet of water out here. So usually that's right on the break, you know. So it's going to drop off just outside that weed edge, maybe 15 to 20 feet.
But if that's more around, let's say 500 or 600 feet, that's still doable?
Yep, as long as it's in your zone of interest. Well, I hope I answered your questions, but you got my contact information, so let me know if you got any more. Thanks.
All right, folks, I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. I also want to thank the Nagawica Lake Yacht Club for putting up with us tonight. I'll hang around. I'll answer questions if people want, but I think you guys have been here long enough. So, again, thank you very much for your attendance. Have a good night.